Alchemy is one of the most intriguing, but at the same time, one of the most difficult to understand topics in the history of science. Alchemy is going to be the first topic that we cover in this lecture. Actually, there are going to be three topics that I cover. First, alchemy. Then, second, a curious division between rival groups of intellectuals in the Islamic world and the very unusual matter theory of one of them. And then finally, since this is the last lecture that I can devote to the Islamic world, we have to talk about the difficult and hard to answer question about the decline and the causes of the decline of Islamic culture, which was in evidence by the end of the 12th century. Well, let's start with alchemy then. There are two aspects I want to talk about. First, its origin outside of the Islamic Empire, that is, in Hellenistic Egypt, in the first few centuries of the Christian era, and then its development into a full-fledged part of natural philosophy in Arabic culture. All right, well, let's start with the background. The background for alchemy, for chemistry, starts about the 3rd century A.D. in Alexandria, the area around Alexandria in Hellenistic Egypt. The Greek word chemia at that time was used to describe a group of processes mostly for the refining, the purification of metals, the making of alloys, the making of artificial gems, and the making of mimics, alloys that mimicked gold and silver. Now, the word chemia seems to come from the Greek verb cheo, which means to melt or to smelt or to cast. So clearly the origins of alchemy, the origins of chemistry, come from this metalworking tradition. What's unfortunate is that very, very little survives from these early Greek texts. We have some scraps of papyrus, we have some more or less corrupt texts from writers like Zosimus, who was a 4th century writer. But it's very difficult to get a clear sense of what was going on in this first phase of alchemy in Hellenistic Egypt. What is clear, however, is that by the time chemistry, chemia, was transferred to the Arab world, the practitioners were no longer interested in making just artificial, look-alike ersatz gold and silver, but actually real gold and silver from cheaper metals by the process known as transmutation. Well, the Islamic world took up Greek texts on alchemy during the translation movement in the 9th century, but soon, certainly by the end of the 9th century, they were starting to do their own chemical experimentation and theorization. There is one story that's told about the Caliph al-Mansur, the founder of Baghdad, that in the late 8th century he heard about alchemy from one of his secretaries who had traveled to the court of Constantine V, the then reigning emperor of the Byzantine Empire, and that this secretary saw at the emperor's court a transmutation of base metals into gold. Now, clearly, something like this would be something that would get the attention of a reigning caliph, monarch, king, prince, whatever. The ability to make gold naturally has certain practical advantages. Well, let's talk about alchemy in the Islamic world. The term alchemy, notice there is the letter al at the beginning again. It is an Arabic word. It's the Arabic article al plus the Greek chemia. That's where the word comes from. And in the Islamic world, this term, alchemia in Arabic, dealt with the study, the treatment, the refining, and the production of specific material substances. Now, just like in astronomy today, we see some remnants of Arabic astronomy, in chemistry today, we can see some remnants of Arabic alchemy. So words like alcohol and alkali and alum are all words that come out of the Islamic Middle Ages, from the Arabic contributions. One of the places for contribution was in the improvement of the practical processes of dealing with material substances. This is something that's special about alchemy or chemistry, that it's intimately related with how human beings deal with material substances. How do we do crystallizations and distillations and sublimations? And how do we work with these substances? Well, part of the Arabic contribution was the devising of improved methods and improved instruments for carrying out things like distillation and crystallization. They improved upon the rudimentary methods that were first devised in Hellenistic Egypt. One of the ways they were able to improve was, again, through a technological substance, a technological ability that was preserved in the Islamic world, namely glass blowing. This nearly died out in the West. The West was not able to make glass. It was made very much in the Roman period, but glass making was not practiced very much in the Latin West until the late Middle Ages. In the Islamic world, however, glass production, glass blowing had reached quite a high level of development. Well, let's talk about describing material substances. If the Islamic Empire is spread out all over a huge swath of territory, there are all kinds of stones and minerals and metals and herbs and various sorts of things that need cataloging. And so catalogs of these were developed in the Arabic world. One of these comes from Ar-Razi, a Persian physician and chemist who was born about 865, died in 925. He's sometimes called the Arab Galen because of his contributions to medicine. He wrote books on fevers and on anatomy and on drugs. And in connection with his work at a hospital that he managed, he was interested in the chemical preparation of various substances, presumably because they could be used medicinally. One of his most important works is the Kitabul Asrar, or the Book of Secrets. This was translated eventually into Latin and became an important part of the corpus of Latin alchemy in the Middle Ages in Europe. Well, besides these practical aspects, we should go to theory now, alchemical or chemical theory. Most important theory is attached to the name of Jabir ibn Hayyan. It's called the mercury-sulfur theory. Let me say something first about Jabir ibn Hayyan. There may at one time have been a person by this name. There may not have been a person by this name. What we do know is that there are about 2,000 books that are attributed, or were attributed at one point, many of them are lost now, to this one character. Either he lived a very long time or he was very prolific. Well, actually neither one of those, because the works were written over about a 150-year period, and they're actually the productions of a Shiite sect that put the name of their founder on basically everything that they wrote. Well, let's look at the theory. The mercury-sulfur theory tries to explain the origin of the metals and why the metals have so many properties in common. They're all shiny, they're all hard, they're fusible, they're able to be hammered and beaten. The mercury-sulfur theory states that all metals are made out of two substances, which Jabir ibn Hayyan, whoever he is, calls mercury and sulfur. This was an outgrowth, a development of an idea that Aristotle promoted in his book on the meteors. He says that underneath the ground, two fumes arise from the center of the earth. One is dry and smoky, one is wet and vaporous. Jabir ibn Hayyan calls the smoky one sulfur and the wet one mercury. They condense underground and combine, and from that we get the metals. When the mercury and sulfur are very pure and in just the right proportion, we get the best metal of all, gold. But when there's too much of one or the other, we get one of the baser metals. Now notice what this does. This theoretically undergirds the possibility of transmutation. Because if all the metals are made out of the same two substances and differ only in proportion and purity of those two ingredients, all you need to do to turn lead into gold is purify the ingredients and get their relative proportions right. So there's a theoretical underpinning for transmutation. Sometimes moderns like to scoff at this long-term search for the secret of transmutation, but really there's a theory that undergirds it. We have a different theory that doesn't, but nonetheless. Transmutation, how is it carried out? Well, supposedly it was supposed to be carried out by a prepared substance that you made in a vessel. And this substance was called by the Hellenistic alchemists the philosopher's stone. It was also called xere. Now, xere is literally a powder that you put on a wound to heal it, a medicinal powder. This xere, apparently, is also a powder that you could put, this philosopher's stone, also called xere, could be put on a metal, and in a few minutes it would transmute it from a base metal into gold, in a sense healing it the way a medicinal xere would heal a wound. The Arabic transliteration of that word xere is iksir, and if you add the Arabic article, you get al-iksir, which is the origin of our word elixir, which is a word we still use to talk about a medicine with great potent characteristics. Well, alchemists in the Islamic world, as well as in the later Latin world, endeavored to prepare this secret substance, the philosopher's stone. The Islamic mercury-sulfur theory promoted by the Jabirian corpus was the foundation of chemical theory in one way or another for the next 800 years. Down until about 1700, there were still developments of the Jabirian mercury-sulfur theory, these two elements that make up the metals and or of other things as well. These ideas were still being promoted in Europe, so it had a very long lifespan. It was very influential. Another important writer I should mention on alchemy is Ibn Sina, known to the Latins as Avicenna. He's 10th and 11th century, born about 980 and dies in 1037. He, like Al-Razi, is Persian, and again, like Al-Razi, was a physician. He wrote a huge book called Al-Qanun, the Canon, about medicine. It's an immense text. It was a compilation of medical knowledge and techniques. After it reached Europe, it was considered authoritative there as a work on medicine until the 17th century, and was printed actually in Arabic in Europe, in fact, not only in translation. In terms of alchemy, Avicenna also wrote a book called the Kitabu Shafa, which is the Book of the Remedy. It adopted the Jabirian mercury-sulfur theory, but at the same time denied, on the basis of Aristotle, the possibility of transmutation. So when Arabic alchemy comes into the Latin West, which we'll see later on, it comes in two different strands. It comes in, first of all, the sort of Jabirian ideas promoting transmutation, looking for the philosopher's stone, the elixir, and also this Avicennian branch that says, well, no, transmutation is not possible. And so right from the very beginning, when alchemy gets into Europe, there is dissension within it. We'll talk about that much more later.